Hello all you freedom-loving people. Welcome to another episode of Front Page. I'm your host, Scott Cameron Goulet. Today is Veterans Day, the day designated to honor those members of our armed forces who served our country with the ultimate sacrifice. We want to do something a little different today and tell you a positive story to remind us of just how precious freedom is and how an individual choosing to do the right thing can make a difference. This was originally planned as one of our membership episodes, but we decided to publish it on YouTube for all to see as our salute to our veterans on this special day. November 9th marks the 32nd anniversary of the toppling of the Berlin Wall. You may not have realized that the felling of the wall was triggered by a single sentence, not the famous quote from President Reagan's Berlin Wall speech that everyone is familiar with, where he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Of course, Gorbachev didn't tear down the wall, but a sentence by a mid-level East German official brought the wall's demise. Okay, let's get into it. It all started with a press conference at 6 p.m. on November 9th, 1989. East Berliners returned to their homes after a long day of work. A press conference was being broadcast live on television, and the East German bureaucrats were talking up the newly convened Politburo Party Congress. Officials droned on for more than 50 minutes, and the journalists present were yawning. The press conference was hosted by Günter Schabowski, who originally studied journalism. After graduating, he joined the media as an editor and eventually became editor-in-chief of the party newspaper New Deutschland. He was the first secretary of the East Berlin City Council, but until that very evening, the Western world did not know of him. At the end of the conference, a journalist from the Italian news agency ANSA asked Schabowski, "You talked about mistakes. Do you think that the draft tourism bill that you prepared a few days ago was also a big mistake?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't know how to respond. Schabowski flipped through some papers, searching for the document he was supposed to read out. An aide handed him the document. He put on his glasses and read, "Citizens are free to apply for permission to travel abroad privately without having to meet any prerequisite for travel or family visit status. The application will be approved soon." The journalists were dumbfounded. A West German journalist shouted, "When will this come into effect? Is it from now on?" Schabowski paused and said, word for word and somewhat awkwardly, "As far as I know, now, immediately." The two reporters followed up with, "Does this apply to West Berlin as well?" Schabowski replied, "Yes, yes, all can leave the country permanently." He then closed the file and left, leaving a room of stunned reporters behind. On the 8 p.m. news that night, the host said, "This is an historic day when the East German government announced the immediate opening of the border to all. The gates of the Berlin Wall have been opened." Major newspapers from around the world blasted headlines, "The people of East Germany are free to leave the country. The gates of the Berlin Wall are open." East Berliners were abuzz with the great news, which came so suddenly. Throngs of excited people gathered at border checkpoints and requested to go to West Germany. An East Berlin citizen said in a television interview, "New rules are in place, and I don't know what to say. I used to cry all night, and now I finally don't need to cry anymore." Just 20 minutes after the announcement, soldiers stationed at the wall saw a crowd of people descending on the area, coming on foot, by public transit, and by car. People shouted, "Open up, open the gate," demanding to pass through. An officer asked them to show their passports and visas. The group said, "We don't have those documents. Didn't you hear what Schabowski said? He said we can leave immediately." This would have been reason enough to shoot someone in the past, but this time it was different. It's true that the border guards, the National Security Service, and the Soviet Army were not notified about the change, but they had watched the TV news, and the whole world was watching. No one wanted to get into trouble at that point. The outnumbered border guards could not cope with the growing crowd, and finally, at 10:45 that night, the border guards gave up the blockade and allowed people to leave the country freely without showing any documents. On the West Berlin side, large crowds gathered to greet them with champagne, beer, and flowers. Many bars offered free beer, strangers hugged each other, and the border was filled with a celebratory atmosphere as many climbed the Berlin Wall to cheer. So it was true that one could pass through the wall, and it was free to pass. No one checked documents, and no one got shot. So now the crowd came like a tidal wave. Some people simply climbed over the wall going straight over. By midnight, all checkpoints were open. West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who was visiting Poland at the time, immediately interrupted his visit to fly to Berlin to experience the joyous celebration of East and West Germans together. The next morning, East Germans woke up ecstatic. More people flocked to the border. The mayor of West Berlin gave each East German who came over 100 West German marks as pocket money and temporary accommodation. It was a dream come true, not only to cross the border freely, but to also receive money. The East Germans who came over did not want to go back, so some people started to knock down the wall with shovels and hammers. The army dared not interfere. The Berlin Wall, a heavily fortified 28-year-old witness to the ideological confrontation between East and West Germany, was brought down without bloodshed and without violence. It was clear that the people had waited too long. However, the East German government, or the German Democratic Republic as it was called, did in fact have plans to lift travel restrictions, but it did not intend to announce it at this unanticipated moment, nor did it intend to liberalize the eastern side so completely. 1989 was an extremely turbulent year for the countries of the Iron Curtain. Poland was the first to change, and then like dominoes, a wave swept through Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, and other Eastern European countries. In May of that year, 6 months before the wall came down, Hungary, a pioneer in democracy, opened its borders with Austria, becoming the first country to lift a corner of the Iron Curtain and allow free movement to the Western world. The Hungarian government announced that it was revoking a 20-year agreement with the German Democratic Republic, the GDR, and unilaterally allowed East German refugees to travel through Hungary to the country they wanted to go to. Thousands of East Germans arrived in Hungary via Poland or Czechoslovakia, and then via Austria, and they flocked to Western Germany. The West German Chancellor at the time publicly praised Hungary's opening of its doors to East German refugees as a humanitarian decision. According to the New York Times, nearly 170,000 East Germans left the country in 1989 alone. That was 1% of the total population of East Germany. The East German officials were furious with the Hungarian policy, but could do nothing about the massive exodus of people. In all socialist countries, traveling abroad is a right reserved for the privileged class. Passport applications required approval from higher authorities. More and more East Germans took to the streets to protest and demand freedom to travel. On October 18th, East German leader Ernst Honecker resigned for health reasons. Egon Krenz became the General Secretary of the Socialist Unity Party of Germany. Protests against the government continued and intensified after the new leaders took office. By November 4th, the largest demonstrations in East Germany's history had broken out in East Berlin, numbering more than 1 million people. The demonstrators wanted not only to travel freely, but demanded early German reunification. The East German government was under unprecedented pressure, so they decided to relax the travel restrictions to make it easier for East Germans to apply to travel to West Germany. Just a few days before the historic press conference, the East German government decided to relax travel restrictions by announcing a draft regulation allowing any citizen to travel abroad. However, the draft contained numerous restrictions, such as citizens can only stay abroad for 30 days on personal business and must apply 30 days in advance. To leave the country permanently, one was required to obtain a security clearance from a superior, which many found almost impossible to get. In addition, the exchange of foreign currency in the German Democratic Republic was strictly limited, and the exchange rate was extremely high. Although these draft changes were already a liberal step for the government, it was not sufficient for the large number of East Germans leaving the country. The public was not satisfied with this small-scale opening. Under heavy pressure, the GDR announced a collective resignation on November 7th, and on the 8th, Hans Modrow formed a coalition government and became chancellor. On the same day, the Politburo of the Socialist Unity Party of Germany resigned en masse and elected a new Politburo headed by Egon Krenz. That's why the Italian journalist at the conference asked Schabowski if the draft regulation was a big mistake, and for the same reason it was a difficult question for him to answer. Hours before the press conference, Egon Krenz gave the nod to pass another travel bill that would further liberalize the ability for residents to apply for visas, but Krenz asked that the news be embargoed and not issued until 4 a.m. on November 10th. The whole country was in a state of confusion at the time. The government was constantly being reorganized, and the people were constantly protesting. No one knew what was going to happen in the next minute. Officials who attended the press conference were anxious for results. Perhaps it was an act of God, or perhaps a slip of the tongue, that Schabowski misinterpreted the regulation to mean that the borders would be completely open and announced its immediate entry into effect. His name would go down in history, forever remembered. Shortly after the reunification, the reorganized Socialist Unity Party of Germany dropped Schabowski from the party organization. Some say that if East Germany had remained, he would have been the most promising successor to Krenz as head of the party. In 1992, Schabowski returned to his old job as editor of a regional tabloid. He became one of the few officials in East Germany to reflect on the wrongdoings of the East German government, and he not only blamed himself deeply, but also attacked Soviet-style socialism over and over again. Between 1961, when the Berlin Wall was constructed, and 1989, when it collapsed, somewhere between 136 and 245 people died crossing the Berlin Wall. As the former mayor of East Berlin, Schabowski also bears responsibility. In 1997, Schabowski was tried by a Berlin court along with other East German officials, accused of being an accomplice in the shooting of fleeing refugees, and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. He accepted the sentence in silence and served it from December 1999, but in December of 2000, he was released from prison, pardoned by the mayor of Berlin. "I don't regret what happened," he said in a media interview on the night of the mistake in 1989. "Those of us in positions of power should be honest with ourselves that the whole system is no longer viable. I was one of those who wanted to change it, but we acted too late, and the pressure from the protest movement was too great. We no longer have room for maneuvers." So it seems that he may have not misunderstood that regulation. He knew the policy the government had set, but in that moment he made a choice of conscience, and he did what he thought was right. I hope you liked this story today. Let's remember our soldiers who made a conscious choice to serve our country and to do what they believed was right. Right now we are facing a cultural war, where we are being split and pitted against each other, and our freedoms are slowly being taken away. It's a conscious fight against socialism and communism. We need to safeguard our freedoms that our armed forces have sacrificed for, so we won't have a Berlin Wall between us in the future. Okay, this is our show for today. If you want more Front Page, please join our membership site for more exclusive content and sensitive news that you cannot see on YouTube. And if you like what you heard, please don't forget to like and subscribe this video and share it with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth. Again, thank you for watching Front Page, and we will see you next time.